I'm Donna Greening, Parkinson Canada's Education and Program Innovation Coordinator. Welcome to our November webinar, Understanding and Managing Falls and Parkinson's. Parkinson Canada acknowledges that we are located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. We respect and affirm the inherent and treaty rights of all Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to live, work, and learn here. We recognize the need for programs, advocacy, and research by and for Indigenous people living with and affected by Parkinson's, and commit to growing partnerships with Indigenous leaders to develop our understanding and support. To access closed captioning, click on the CC Captions button and then click on Show Subtitle. American Sign Language interpretation is available during this webinar. To access the ASL channel, click on the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen, then select American Sign Language under the Watch option. We're always grateful for the expert speakers who join us to share their knowledge during our webinars. If you have questions about today's topic after the conclusion of the webinar, please contact your healthcare provider or Parkinson Canada's support and information team. There's no need to take any notes during the webinar. We'll be sending everyone a link to the webinar recording along with hyperlinks to the resources. If you have a question, please type it in the Q&A tab found at the bottom of your webinar window. We're not selecting questions from the chat window, but feel free to use that window to say hello or offer words of encouragement. When the webinar ends, please take a moment to fill out our survey that we use to evaluate our programming, ensuring that we're delivering content that's relevant to you, our Parkinson's community. Now, let's get started and meet today's presenter. Naomi Casero is a registered physiotherapist and the owner of NeuroFit BC, a physiotherapy practice and educational platform focused on Parkinson's and falls training. Naomi teaches older adults to fall properly and educates healthcare professionals on how to effectively treat Parkinson's. Prior to developing her own treatment model, Naomi trained as a power therapist and completed both basic and advanced level postgraduate training in the BOBATH concept. She designed and created the Changing Parkinson's course based on years of clinical experience and research-based knowledge. Naomi has worked in neuro rehab in both private and public practices. Prior to becoming a physiotherapist, Naomi practiced as a kinesiologist, swim coach, and a personal trainer, which is where her inspiration to help clients build healthy, balanced lives through exercise began. She developed the Fundamentals of Functional Movement program, or FFM, for the treatment of Parkinson's clients, which she uses in clinical practice and teaches to students and health professionals across the country. Naomi strives to combine the worlds of exercise and neuro rehab to give clients with neurological conditions and older adults a more holistic approach to health and recovery. She's passionate about helping people with Parkinson's fight back against the condition and helping those who fall avoid life-altering injuries. Currently, Naomi runs exercise programs, treats clients, runs seminars and courses across Canada, and is an adjunct professor at the University of British Columbia in the physiotherapy department. When not pursuing her passion in physiotherapy, Naomi can be found playing with her 3 young children or exploring the world of exercise through martial arts, weightlifting, and swimming. Welcome, Naomi.
Thanks, Donna, for the lovely introduction. And great to see so many of you from all over Canada. I can just see the chat blowing up with all these wonderful hellos from all over. I am going to share my screen and we're going to get started right away because we have so many hopefully interesting and applicable things to cover for all of you today. Like Donna said, we're going to be answering some questions at the end, but I am going to get started so that we can get through as much as possible in our hour together. All right. Let's get everything out of the way so you guys can see as much as possible here. Okay, so we are talking about falls and Parkinson's today. This is a topic that, as you can hear from my bio, I am very, very passionate about. You heard all the details that you need to know about me. My contact information is on here if you want it. And we are going to talk about what we are going to learn today. If my little clicker wants to work. Let's see. Oh, I'll use it from here. All right, so just a disclaimer, guys. This is informational, right? This does not replace information from your healthcare provider. We are just here to give you some tips and tools and things that you can hopefully use. But if you have questions that are specific to your situation, please contact your healthcare provider. All right. So, learning objectives. What do we want to accomplish today? Well, first of all, I would like you to understand where your falls are actually most likely to happen and what falls treatment looks like. I'm hoping that you can start to evaluate your own falls, so get some information on how to actually look at your falls, or if you're not having falls yet, that's great. We're going to talk about near misses as well, and how you can kind of individualize your own falls training routine according to the challenges that you might be having. I want to give you tips on how to actually fall properly and what we're trying to think about when we're thinking about how we end up going down to the ground. And then I want you to start to understand what you can incorporate into your exercise routine that can make a difference for, again, your risk of falling, your overall function, and making sure that if you do have a fall, you fall properly and avoid a fracture. All right, so what we know that falls are the leading cause of accidental injury and injury related death in older adults. So falls are quite dangerous when they happen, not always, but often. And we know that so many people over the age of 70 fall every year, and those numbers are even higher when you have Parkinson. And we know that a lot of people, once they've fallen once, often have recurrent falls. So we tend to see this cycle with falling. What happens is, and many of you may have experienced this, once you have a fall, you get this increase in fear, right? Everything becomes a little bit more stressful. You're worried about having a fall again. And what happens with that is that you tend to knowingly or unknowingly start to reduce your activity levels. Maybe go out a little bit less, maybe go, places that you stop going places that you might have gone before to do different activities because you're worried about the stairs that might be there or the uneven ground, right? We tend to reduce activity levels, and that has an impact on psychological health and it has an impact on physical health. And those impacts increase your falls risk, which tends to lead to another fall. And then we continue this cycle. So what we're often trying to do is see if we can break this cycle somewhere so that we don't end up in that downward spiral of falls. So there's these big data sets, population data sets that look at falling. And I did a big deep dive into them. There's a Canadian one that I'm going to go over a little bit of the details with you today. And then the trends are very much the same when you look at the United States and Australia. They're very similar outcomes. So we're not going to go into a huge deep dive, but I wanted to give you some very interesting points that came out of this kind of population survey that was done across Canada. So this is the Canadian one. And what this graph is showing you is that when people are most likely to fall by a long shot is when they're walking. And if you look at the purple segment of that graph, it's actually just walking on regular ground. So we're not talking about ice or slippery surfaces or anything like that. We're talking about regular ground. And then when you add in that light blue segment at the bottom, that's when you add in ice or snow or slippery surfaces. And so if you look at the two of those put together, you can see that that's more than 50% of falls is people just walking, right? So that is when we are most likely to have our falls. It's not climbing ladders or doing anything crazy. It's when we're walking, which means that we need to make sure that we are optimizing what we're doing when we're walking so that we can prevent some of those falls from happening, and also know how to get down to the ground from walking if we have a fall. We're going to talk about both of those. So what happens when somebody falls? Most often people have a fracture. So again, if you look at the percentages here, we're showing you that almost 40% of these falls led to fractures. And fractures is the really big important thing that we're trying to avoid, because especially when it comes to things like hip fractures, we start to see significant increases in mortality rate. So our goal when I teach this clinically and when we talk about it today is how can you have a fall and avoid a fracture, right? Our motto in the clinic is that bruised and battered is better than broken. Of course, we would love if you have no falls, but if we're going to have a fall, we want to make sure that you don't have a fracture and that your head and neck are protected. And again, we're going to be talking lots about that today. So the reality is that we have focused a lot in the last 5 to 10 years on falls prevention. There's been lots of new studies and lots of new programs and lots of information that has come out on falls prevention, which is great. Falls prevention is a great tool. But the reality is that even with all that work we've done, falls still happen, and they happen a lot. So I put on here that the death rates from falls are rising in North America. That comes from those global studies as well. That's not to scare you. It's to show you that we can't ignore that falls still happen. We need to understand what to do about them. So that's where we're going to talk about our falls treatment. So in our current system, when somebody is off balance, right, or having falls or having near misses, we tend to really focus on these protective, preventative pieces. So we give assistive equipment, walkers and walking poles, and we use things like hip protectors. We talk about exercising, although I would argue that often the exercise is slightly under challenging from where it needs to be. And then we focus on things like the environment. We put in grab bars, we look at taking away carpets, things like that. We tend to look at people's medication and we educate them on falls prevention. All of these things are very, very good. It's not that we should stop doing these things, but there is something desperately missing from this picture, and that is what we're going to talk about next. So what are we missing when we look at this picture? I'm going to show you 2 videos, and this is going to help me explain what we're talking about and what we're missing. This is, This is my oldest daughter learning how to walk. And as for any of you who have kids or grandkids or anything like that, you know that when children are learning to walk, they fall a lot. So we watched that video and probably doesn't stress you out so much. And now we're going to watch this video. And this is a client of mine who was falling very, very frequently, many, many, many times a day. And there he had a fall in his hallway. Now that second video probably looks a lot scarier than the first video did, right? And the reason is that what we're missing is that people do fall, and it's not the fall itself that's the problem, right? You see kids fall all the time, they tumble and they get back up and they keep going, right? And people who have learned falls training often tumble and get back up and keep going. The issue that we really need to focus on is what causes the injury. And what causes the injury is how you impact the ground, right? The position that you impact in and the force with which you impact. So in the first video, you can see, the impact position is starting from low down, and there's not a very strong force as she goes down to the ground. In the second video, that looks a lot different. You're looking at a higher force from a tall stand, and the position is right onto the hip, which is problematic, right? So what we need to think about when we think about falls is a picture of falls treatment. When you think about falls treatment, I want you to think about 2 columns. One is prevention, right? We want to prevent falls where we can, but we do know that falls still happen. And the second column that is often missing is falls training. So falls treatment includes falls prevention and falls training. Okay, and I promise we will get to practical tips and tricks for all of this. So what have we learned so far? Let's do a quick brief review. So statistically, we know that if you've fallen once, it is likely that you will fall again. We know that falls are most common when you're walking, right? And we know that once you've had a fall, you tend to reduce your activity level, and that reduces your level of function. So now the question becomes, what can we do about it? Well, one of the things that we're going to talk about today is building your falls portfolio. We're going to get to this in our practical component. We want to start to make sure that every patient who has falls or risk of falls or near misses is starting to build their own falls portfolio. We'll get into detail about that. Another thing that we want to do when we're looking at treating these things is making sure that in your training regimen, so in your exercise, you're including treatment for gait, right? Falls happen when we're walking. We need to make sure that we're optimizing gait. We want to make sure that we're treating for stability and mobility. Functional movement training is in there, and falls training. Those are 4 really key categories that we want in your exercise routine, okay? We want to make sure that we're challenging your functional strength and mobility as part of that. And that means that we need to know what you specifically want to do, right? When you're doing exercises, well, you can do a general exercise routine, but that might need to look different if you want to lift your grandkids up, or if you want to go traveling, or if you want to garden. We need to make sure that we're applying things specifically to what you want to be able to do, right? And then the last piece that I put in here is that when you are thinking about your treatment and your exercise, do not underestimate yourself or others based on age or diagnosis. These people in this picture, including the one who is on his hands jumping with his feet up in the air, are over the age of 60. They all have Parkinson's disease. I think sometimes we hear those things and tend to underestimate people, but the capacity for all of you is very high. We just need to figure out the way to pull out that capacity and make sure that you are exercising appropriately to be able to do as much as you can. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys a video. This video gives you a little sneak peek into what challenging training looks like, what some falls training looks like, what some of our group classes look like. I think it's just very valuable for you to have a visual of what all this looks like in practice. So I'm going to show you this video. It's a few minutes long, and then we will get on to some more tips and tricks. That's a big weight shift, Sam. You got it.
No.
Yep.
I can't.
Yes, you can. That's it. Rock if you need to. Count 1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3.
Okay, so hopefully that gives you a little bit of a visual of kind of what this looks like in practice. Let's
Let's get physical, physical. I wanna get physical. Let's get into physical. Let me hear your body talk. Your body.
So we're going to get into a little bit of practical here. Again, if you have specific questions, please talk to your healthcare professional or your doctor. Don't do anything today that feels unsafe to you. I'm going to take you through some different things. If you are not in an environment where this is safe for you to do it, then please don't. If you feel like you are safe to do this at home, then please feel free to join. We're going to talk first a little bit about falls portfolio. So what I want you to do, and we do this for every client who comes into our clinic who's had near misses or falls, is we're going to start to build a portfolio of what those situations look like and see if we can start to detect patterns. What happens often is that people say, oh, I've had a fall, and they get asked, okay, well, how many falls did you have? And did you hurt yourself? No. Okay, moving on. We need a lot of detail about those falls in order to treat them appropriately. So I want you to think about or write down or voice record some of the information about your specific falls or near misses. So I want you to ask for every major fall or significant near miss in the last 3 to 6 months, these questions. Now, if you're having a fall every week, you can do it for the last, 2 or 3 weeks, but we want a few scenarios to look at to start to see if there's patterns coming out. So we want to know, where were you when you fell? What were you doing just before you fell? What time of day was it? Where were you on your medication? Were you on an off time or an on time? What direction did you fall in? If you can't remember what direction you fell in or how you fell, your landing position gives us a good clue for that. So thinking about, if I landed on my left hip, then I probably fell sideways to my left. If I, landed on my tailbone, well, then I went backwards. It can give you more information about kind of how you fell, because it often happens so fast, it's hard to kind of keep track of what was going on. So you want to think about, did you get any injuries, bruises, anything more significant, landing position, and likely culprits. And we're going to talk about some of the likely culprits when it comes to falls and Parkinson's. So for each of your falls, you're going to get that information, and then we're going to try and start to detect patterns. And again, when we come to the reasons that people fall in Parkinson's, you'll see some of those patterns come out. But treating somebody who has orthostatic hypotension and treating their falls is not necessarily the same as treating somebody who has freezing of gait and falls forward. So we need to get this information, and you can do this on your own and bring it to your practitioner or whoever's helping you, or even, your trainer or your doctor, to see if they can help assist you. But giving them this information is very helpful. So what patterns do you see? Are you always falling forwards or backwards? Are you always falling on your off times? Are you starting to fall in multiple directions, or just when you get up from lunchtime? Those patterns can be really, really valuable for those who are working with you. And then, is there a fear of falling, and can we break the cycle? So are you starting to notice that as you have those falls, that you're more tentative in your movement patterns, and that's starting to lead to more falls? We want to look at whether or not there are any factors contributing to your falls that you might be able to self-adjust, right? If you are always falling when you get up from a chair after lunch, well, can we change the environment? Can we change what you are doing in that chair before you get up? Can we teach you some exercises and work on some things to make sure that you can treat yourself at home before you have that fall, right? Getting up and down off the floor, and I'm going to say this, you're going to hear me say this multiple times today. This is one of the best things that you can do to work on managing and preventing that fear of falling, is getting up and down off the ground. So we need to practice this skill before we have a fall, or if you've already had a fall, then we need to practice this skill immediately. This is something that is often missed, and we really want to start paying attention to, right? Can you work on this at home in a safe setting, or with a healthcare practitioner in a safe setting, so you are super confident getting up and down, okay? And then, have you worked on your strength and conditioning work in varying postures? So if you're having falls, we want to make sure that you are working on balance and stability and strength in a whole host of different postures, some of which you saw in the video and some of which we will talk about a little bit later. Okay. So what most often leads to falls in Parkinson's? There are a few big ones that we're going to talk about, and talk about some potential treatment techniques that we can use for them. So one of the ones that we see a lot, and I know there were some questions on from our pre-questions, was orthostatic hypotension. So orthostatic hypotension is when you get this quick drop in your blood pressure when you change position, usually from sitting to standing, but it can also be from lying down to standing as well. And what the picture that very often presents is, somebody will say, well, I got up, I felt fine for a few seconds, I took a step or two, and then I just went down, right? And there's often a little bit of like seeing stars and things like that can go along with it, some dizziness. We want to make sure that you are self-treating in these positions where you start to get dizzy if you have an orthostatic hypotensive response. So if you are in a seated position, and things that can make this worse are, you've just had a big meal, right? So all the blood is going to your stomach to digest. You've been sitting for a long time. Maybe you're sitting and watching a TV show or a movie, and you've been kind of seated for a longer period of time. We want to make sure that you are preemptively doing some things before you stand up to get your blood pressure pumping, and that when you stand up, you are doing things a little bit differently as well. So we're going to talk about a few very, very, very simple exercises that you can do when you are sitting before you stand up in order to start to pump that blood pressure up. So one of the things that you can do is marching your legs. So in a seated position, just marching your knees about 20 or 30 times to start to get the blood flowing can really help. The other thing you can do to start to increase the blood pressure a little bit is to hook your hands together and pull apart strongly. So if you pull apart strongly and you hold for about 10 seconds, you can do that a few times just to start getting that blood pumping before you stand up. And another really great one is to pump your ankles. So when you are in a seated position, I'm just gonna make sure you guys can see my feet here. So if you're in a seated position, just pumping your heels up and down, okay, can start to get the calf active, and having your calf muscles working helps to pump that blood up a little bit in anticipation of getting up before you get that there, and that can help to get that blood pressure up a little bit before you stand. Once you stand up, if you know you are prone to a hypotensive response, you really want to make sure that you don't start stepping right away, because it often takes a few seconds for it to kick in, and if you are now away from your stable environment, You have nothing to go down to if you have a fall. So standing up and pausing for about 10 to 20 seconds can make a big difference to making sure that you are nice and stable and your blood pressure isn't going to drop before you go anywhere. When you're in standing, again, in order to start getting that blood pressure up before we move, doing those heel raises, again, is a really good way to start pumping that blood up. So you can practice that. You can do this with a walker, right? You can do this with poles. You can do this with a wall or a chair, anything to keep you stable. But just coming up onto those toes and bouncing a little bit up and down can really help to pump that blood up and reduce that hypotensive response. We know that orthostatic hypotension is common in Parkinson's, both because of the disease itself and because of the medication. So if you're at risk, use those little tips and tricks to see if you can prevent that before it happens and keep yourself a little safer. Okay. Another big one is festinating or freezing of gait. That's where we get those little kind of shuffly steps, or we actually get stuck and stop. There's a lot of different treatments that come into freezing of gait, and I wish I could teach you them all today, but I cannot. So we're going to talk about one of the basics, and that is the 4 S's. So if you are somebody who is freezing or festinating, we're going to talk very briefly about the 4 S's today. And the 4 S's are these. First thing you're going to do is stop. When people are freezing, they often tend to try and keep moving forward to undo the freeze. And that is often what leads to falls, because your feet are stuck to the ground and they're not going anywhere. So first thing we want to do is stop. Then we want to stand tall. So shift your weight up and back a little bit. Then you're going to shift sideways and you're going to step big. Okay. If your weight is 50% on one leg and 50% on the other, we can't move anywhere. We have to shift our weight to move. So stop, stand tall, shift your weight, and step. Okay. Another challenge with Parkinson's that causes falls is dual tasking. So you are trying to carry your cup of water and you are trying to, talk to your spouse or your friend, and you're trying to walk forwards. Well, now your brain has to attend to a lot of different things at once, and there's not enough space, and your feet either stop moving as big or they stop moving as fast, and you end up on the floor. So with dual tasking, there's 2 ways to come at it. Number 1, you reduce your dual tasking. So you make sure that at home you are walking somewhere and doing that one specific thing with focus. And if you need to talk to somebody, that you're in a stable position before you're answering questions and talking to them, or you are carrying your water and focusing on that, putting it down where it needs to go, and then turning your head to address whatever comes next. The other thing is that you can train this. So if you know there is a challenge in dual tasking, you can set up a training environment so you actually practice those skills. And again, we do this a lot in clinic, where we're looking at what is a specific dual tasking challenge that you have trouble with, and can we repeat it in a way that is simpler, that you can practice to build up that skill. Okay. Another one that is a big one is multi-directional movements. Okay. And we're going to talk about this in the gait section. We're going to all together work on some multi-directional movement. So I'll leave that one for now. Foot catch and dystonia is one that we see a lot. So if your foot is starting to curl in and your toes are curling and your ankle's starting to curl in a little bit, either when you walk and lift your foot or even sometimes statically, that can be a sign of dystonia, which we're not going to get into in detail today, but it is worth talking to your healthcare provider about, because that can also lead to tripping and falls. And then proprioceptive response. So being able to feel your feet on the floor. We're going to get to this one also in more detail when we get to our tips. So we're not going to talk about that one just yet. And the last one I have on this list is fatigue. So knowing your body and your day is very important. People often get really tired in the afternoon and start to notice that their falls are clustering in the afternoon. So making sure that we're aware of our fatigue timing and that we moderate our activities accordingly. If you know you're tired in the afternoon, then you want to try and bulk your activities to the morning so that you can be more safe later on in the day and are required to do less than trying to do everything in the afternoon when you're most fatigued. Okay. We're also going to talk about VO2 max later, which is going to come into fatigue as well. So those are some of your key factors when it comes to key contributors when it comes to falling in Parkinson's. Okay. So we're going to talk about top tips now. If you can stand up and if you have space to do so, and if you're safe to do so, then I'm going to get everyone to stand up and we're going to start thinking about our feet a little bit. Okay. My first tip for balance and falls is you need to get to know your feet again. This is your contact to the floor, and being aware of where your feet are on the floor is a very, very valuable tool to give you information about where the rest of your body likely is in space. So we're all going to stand up and we're going to work on our foot triangle and something called ankle strategy. Okay. When you think about your foot, I want you to imagine a triangle. You can see it in the picture there on the bottom of your foot. 1 point on your big toe, 1 point on your pinky, under your pinky toe, and 1 point under your heel to make this nice triangle. Okay. When you stand on your feet, you want to feel equal weight from side to side, so equal weight on my left and my right. But I also want to feel like I can suction cup all 3 points of that triangle to the floor. So I want you to think about getting the pad of the big toe suction cup to the floor, the pad of the pinky toe, and the pad of the heel, all really suction cup to the floor. The first thing that is going to tell you if you're having a fall is your feet. If you start to go backwards, you're going to feel the front of your feet start to pull to tell you that they're trying to rebalance you, right? If you're starting to go forwards, you're going to feel your heels start to come off the ground. So we're going to practice what we call ankle strategy. This is the first strategy that your body uses to maintain balance, to see if we can draw your attention a little bit more to those feet. So what I want you to do is get into a safe position. Again, if you need a wall behind you, please make sure there's a wall behind you. If you need somebody to assist you, please make sure they're there. Please take care of your own body, okay? We're going to start to lean towards our limits of stability. So you're going to keep everything straight except for your ankles. You're going to tilt at your ankles going forwards. I'll show you this sideways because it's a little bit easier to see. I'm going to start to tilt just a little bit forwards. And what I start to feel is my toes curling into the ground. You can see that my body is staying tall, but I'm tilting forwards and putting all the weight on the first 2 points of that triangle, okay, until I feel my toes start to curl. Then I'm going to start to go backwards carefully until I feel the front of my toes start to want to lift off the ground. And you're going to start to practice what we call the limits of your stability using your ankle strategy. Okay, this is something that you can practice at home and start to really draw your attention to your feet so you can feel, oh, when I go back, or I tend to maybe stand back normally, I feel the front of my feet off the ground. If I dig my pad of my big toe and pad of my pinky toe in, then I feel a lot more stable in center. If you're a festinator and a freezer, it's possible that you stand forwards of your triangle most of the time, and maybe you need to start shifting back. So starting to practice that triangle can give you some more tools to draw your attention and reduce your risk of being off balance in the first place, okay? The other thing I want you to think about is what shoes you are wearing on your feet, okay? Things like Hokas, for example, right? While very comfortable, are essentially like walking on an unstable cloud. They are like walking on a balance pad that's meant to almost throw you off balance. Your feet have very little connection to the floor in shoes that are very built up. So I put some suggestions on the slides. You guys will have a recording and the information there. I want you to start thinking about what is on your feet and whether or not you can actually feel the ground through your shoes. The more you can feel the ground, the more you are able to adjust your feet accordingly, and therefore the better you are able to balance. Okay? Tip number 2, we're going to talk about walking, because walking is not only one directional, okay? We walk in a lot of different directions and we need to practice that. So I'm going to teach you today. I wish I could teach you everything, but we're going to focus on one that is a very common issue in Parkinson's, and that is stepping backwards, okay? People who tend to be retropulsive or tipping backwards often stand with the weight on their heels, so that front of their foot triangle is often not as connected to the floor as it needs to be. And they often lack the ability to step backwards safely. So everybody needs to be able to step backwards safely. When you go to open a door, you often need to step back in order to step through, right? When you take something out of your fridge and you go to put it on the counter, you need to be able to step back in order to take that item and put it on the counter. So here's what I want you to think about. Again, I know I'm a broken record. Be safe. Please make sure you have a wall behind you if you need it. Please make sure you are safe in your environment to do this. The thing I want you to remember about backward stepping is that the second your shoulders get behind your heels, you are at risk of a fall. Okay. When you backward step, you want to actually shift your shoulders forwards. So we're going to practice backward stepping, but actually shifting our shoulders forwards as our foot goes back. Okay. So all we're going to practice is shoulders forward, foot back. And then again on the other side, shoulders forward, foot back. When you do this, you're going to be in a much more stable position if somebody were to try and push you over than if you step back like this, where now all it takes is a gust of wind to tip me. Okay. So your key marker, if you're a backwards faller, is as I go back, my shoulder goes forward, my foot goes back. My shoulders go forward, my foot go back. You want to practice this with a wide base, so your feet are wide apart. And if I am actually moving backwards, what I want to think about is, in order to shift, I don't want to go like this. If I go like this, now I'm into that back leaning position. You want to go sideways and step, almost like you're skating. Sideways and step. Okay. So again, practicing backward step with shoulders forward, and then I shift sideways to bring my other leg behind me. My shoulders stay forward the whole time. Okay. So a little window into how we can practice multi-directional walking to keep us safe from falls. Onwards and upwards. Okay. Tip number 3, we're going to talk about gait in Parkinson's. I have clips from some videos that I've done for the Parkinson Society. These videos will be available to you in full through Parkinson's Canada, when they get them on their website, and they will give you the information around those. But here's a clip from one of them talking about some of the primary gait issues that I see in Parkinson's and how you can look at treating them on your own. I'm going to teach you 3 important things that I see really commonly in the clinic that we can work on right away when it comes to gait in Parkinson's. Okay. One of the things that I see over and over and over again in the clinic with my Parkinson's patients is that they really struggle to stack their weight over each leg evenly in walking. What does that mean? Well, when you're walking and you're off balance, people tend to start to shuffle. We know that that's a symptom of Parkinson's generally as well. So if you combine that with being off balance, there's probably a high chance that you're taking smaller, shorter steps and not actually shifting your weight side to side. When we're walking, it's important to get our weight up and over one side so that we actually have balance and strength to free the other leg to move in space. If we don't do that, then we risk tripping, we start to get into our freezing and festinating, and it just puts you at higher risk of a fall overall. So what I want you to think about when you're walking is, if you had a string pulling you up tall in the center, and you were a little marionette doll and somebody was controlling you, as you step onto your right foot, you should be coming up and over onto the right side, not staying centered. When you come up onto your left foot, you should be doing the same thing. Another good way to think about that is leading the movement with your hips. So as you step onto your right, push your hip forward and ground down through your heel, so you're really strong and stable on that right side before you switch to stepping and doing the same thing on the left. The next thing that we use a lot in clinic, and that is a really, really good way to very quickly improve your walking, is to count your steps and then try and reduce them. So I want you to pick a stretch, maybe a block or a hallway in your house, and count every foot when you walk. So you're going to walk that hallway or that block, and you're going to count every step. Then you're going to go back to the beginning, and let's say you did it in 10 steps. You're now going to try and do it in 9. If you can make it in 9, you're going to try and do it in 8. And if you can make it in 8, you're going to try and do it in 7. What you will notice is, as you try and increase your power and reduce your steps, you'll start to push off your back toes, you'll start to use your arms more, and you'll start to kick into those big those big bum muscles that help propel you forward. So this is a really quick and simple trick to improve your gait in a very short period of time, and you can do this when you're out walking around the block or doing any kind of walking activity. Our third walking tip is that you don't only ever walk forwards straight in life. Again, we really want to take your training and translate it to what you do in reality. When you're walking around in daily life, you need to walk forwards. You need to be able to step backwards. You need to be able to move sideways. You need to move in all planes of movement. So don't only train your forwards walking if you want to be able to step in other directions and not fall down. So we talked about our backwards walking already. So we did a little bit of backward stepping practice. But again, we know that falls happen in walking, right? We saw the data. Most of our falls are going to happen in walking. So we can't ignore our gait. It's an important part of training. All righty. So our next tip is that when you are looking at your training routine, you want to make sure that you have functional movement training included in there. So that includes pushing, pulling, and power exercises, squatting, hinging, and lunging, activating your core, and practicing carrying. So I want you to think about now, close your eyes and think about, in 1 year, what do you want to be able to do with your body? Again, do you want to be able to lift your luggage up into the plane, right? Into the overhead compartment? Do you want to be able to play with your grandkids on the floor? Do you want to be able to tend to your garden? Do you want to be able to carry all your groceries inside in one go, for any of you who are as stubborn as I am? What do you want to be able to do 1 year from now? And what do you want to be able to do 5 years from now? I want you to backtrack those skills and think about what they require. So if I want to be able to get down to the floor, I need to be able to hinge at my hips, squat with my legs. I need to be able to weight bear through my arms. If I want to be able to lift something up into the overhead compartment, I need to be able to push strongly and then pull strongly to get it back down. We want to translate these functional skills into your exercise routine. So I want you to think about what you want to be able to do and think about what components you need to be able to do that, and make sure that that is built into your exercises. Exercise for the life that you want to have. Okay. Tip number 4 is that your VO2 max matters. So VO2 max is your the volume of oxygen that your body can use during exercise. It's a really good indicator of cardiovascular health, and it can help with some component of the fatigue that can come along with Parkinson's. There is another component of fatigue with Parkinson's that is disease related, but if you also have a low VO2 max and a low ability to use oxygen in your body as you exercise, then that can impact fatigue as well. So the nice part about this is that we know with Parkinson's, one of the most disease modifying and preventative disease mitigating things that you can do is intensive exercise. Well, lucky for us, that also increases your VO2 max. So I want you to think about an activity that you're doing now that you could make more intense and how you could do that. So if you go for a daily walk, right? People often say, well, I exercise, I walk. And my question is, can we make that more intense? Instead of just doing a walk, can we get you to go up a hill? Can you find a set of stairs that you can go up and down? Can you walk 1 block fast and then 1 block slow, right? Can you use that step counting that we just talked about in the video to increase your stride length and your intensity for 1 length of whatever you're doing and then bring it back down again? We want to start adding some type of intensity and interval training into your routine. And again, we know that VO2 matters and intensity matters, and that gait really is important when it comes to falls. Okay. So we're going to talk about how to actually fall properly. I told you that we want to do all the preventative stuff, which is the stuff we just talked about, right? All the gait training, all the orthostatic hypotension, all the different things that can help you reduce your risk of falls in the first place. But what about if you have a fall? Now, I can't teach you falls training top to bottom in the very few minutes we have left today, but I'm going to show you this video that is going to give you some of the key tips that you want to think about if you are having a fall to the floor, okay? So that takes us to tip number 2, which is that how you fall matters. I want you to think about 3 important things when it comes to how you fall, and we'll show some examples of these in just a minute. The first is that you want to protect your head. The second is that we want to avoid breaking a bone at all costs. And the third is that we're going to work to carry our momentum and to dissipate force. These are things that we want to think about ahead of time, because when you have a fall, you don't have time to think. We want to train these things into your system before that fall happens. So when it happens, it's ingrained and happens naturally. Okay, so let's talk about those 3 important points when it comes to falls training. I want you to remember that while I'm demoing these here today, I am in a safe environment with matted flooring. If you want to try these should be done under the guidance of a healthcare professional in a safe environment where they can help you learn how to do these activities safely. The first we talked about is to protect the head. When you are falling, we want to make sure that the head is protected and not going to hit the floor. In a backwards fall, that looks like tucking the chin in towards the chest and avoiding the head flying backwards. Not only does this protect the head, but it helps avoid that outstretched arm and extended spine, which can lead to fractures in other areas. So we want to tuck the chin. When we go down, we want to make sure that as we go down, the chin stays tucked and we don't get that extended head posture. If you're falling forwards, protecting the head most often means having your head turned to the side as you hit the floor. The second key point I made was that we want to avoid breaking a bone at all costs. That sounds simple, but it's not so simple in practice. The positions that people often land in going backwards are arms out here and on their hip, which risks a forearm fracture and or a hip fracture. And going forwards, the same concept where we land, arms are out, and you're risking a fracture in the forearms. Yes, other places, of course, can fracture as well, pelvic fractures, spinal fractures. We want to avoid all fractures at all costs, and there are a few ways to do that. When we're going backwards, we want to think about keeping our hands at 45 degrees. So we want to avoid this landing position where we are outstretched and landing in a locked posture. We want to think about reaching the hands to 45 degrees and practicing that position so we get out of that reflexive reach when we're going backwards. In coming forwards, we want to think about taking our momentum through to the floor. So avoiding landing in an outstretched arm posture and rather carrying our momentum through the forearms down to the floor, turning our head sideways as we discussed. The third point I made, and this is a really important one, was that we want to carry momentum and dissipate force. When we're going backwards, you saw that my hands landed palm down with my forearms to the floor when I rolled back, and that's an important way to help dissipate the force. You also saw that I was rolling. My spine was rounded, my chin was tucked. I'm dissipating the force and I am carrying my momentum so that I'm not landing and stopping abruptly and having all the force directed into 1 or 2 joints. When you're going forwards and you're falling, if you have a moment to think, or in your training, what you want to think about is actually reaching out like you are trying to catch the floor versus trying to stop yourself with the floor. That way you land and you absorb the pressure right away, go straight down to the chest. Or in an ideal world, if we're falling to our belly, we want to actually fall to our forearms so they can dissipate some of that force as well. The other great way to do this is to practice rolling, so we can actually roll sideways or at an angle. Again, we want to think about carrying that momentum. So instead of falling sideways and landing on a hip, we're going to continue that momentum, rolling all the way over to our side. So again, short and sweet version of falls training. Obviously, there can be a lot more to it, but key things you want to remember is ragdolling. Go floppy, right? The more rigid you are, the more likely you are to fracture. So we want to kind of flop down, let the body crumple, roll, tuck as you go down. And we are thinking about really absorbing and carrying that momentum through as you go down to the floor, right? Avoiding those kind of rigid arm out postures where we tend to see the fractures in the arms or the fractures in the hips. I know I'm pushing time, guys. We're almost there. Number 6, there's only 2 more. Number 6 is I want you to think about when you are getting down to the floor, when you're thinking about falls training, when you're thinking about functional movement training. I hear all the time, I can't get down to the floor. And we get every patient that comes into our clinic onto the floor. So every person who came into the clinic and said, I can't, has now gotten onto the floor. I want you to think, is it that you can't do it? or is that you haven't done it in a long time. They're different things, right? Again, we need to start challenging our perception of what we are capable of at different stages and ages and things like that. I want you to really think about, is this something that I can practice at home? Can I start to challenge myself more, add functional movement training in, and practice getting up and down off the ground? We're going to talk last thing today we're going to talk about is what to do if you fall. Now, again, there's a whole video on this with Parkinson's Canada that they will be able to give you the information of when it comes out. But I'm going to just go through the steps very briefly with you today. Falls are very scary. I understand that, right? It is scary to have a fall, and getting up can be very stressful for people. So the first thing that I say to my clients when they have a fall is you need to stop and take a breath. Your system is going to be stressed. We know that stress increases Parkinson's symptoms. So you're going to likely feel rigid and stiff and like you can't move or you can't get up. You need to calm your nervous system down. So there is an immediate rush to want to get up and scramble your way into standing. And sometimes that leads to another fall, right? If you're in public, I know it can be embarrassing, but we really need to stop and take a breath and know that there is no rush to get up, right? Take a second and just remind yourself, right? I can sit here if I need to, and I will get back up when I'm ready, okay? The next thing you want to do is check for injury. So you're looking for things that you can't weight bear on, things that have excruciating levels of pain, right? Or obvious visual breaks. Okay, we're basically looking for a fracture. So if you can't weight bear through your wrist, you can't put your hand to the ground, you're in excruciating pain, it's starting to swell, that's when you know it's time to call an ambulance and ask for help. If you assess your body and it doesn't look like there's any major injury, then you're going to start assessing your environment. Now, again, hopefully after this, you've started practicing getting up and down off the ground and you've used that skill in your training. So you know that there are multiple ways to get up and down off the ground. And you can start to look around you and see what might be usable. So looking for things like chairs, low but raised surfaces like ottomans, couches, anything like that. Once you assess your environment and see what your options are, you're going to, again, know your options. If you watch this video in full when it comes out, you'll see that I give you some options for getting up and down off the ground. There are multiple ways to get up and down, all of which are great. You want to practice multiple different ways so that when you're down there, you know, okay, I know I've got options. I can get up from my knees or I can get up from my bum. I've got different ways to do it. And then you are going to remember that you have hopefully beforehand practiced these options, right? So if you have practiced this beforehand, you're much, much, much more likely to be able to do it at home. One of the clients that you saw in those pictures was somebody who had a fall at home. She's diabetic and has Parkinson's. She had a fall at home and laid on the floor for 2 hours because she couldn't get up. And after practicing and learning different ways to get up, had a fall again and was able to get up using her bed and didn't have to wait 2 hours and call the ambulance. So it is a trained skill, just like anything else. You're not going to be good at the things you don't work on. So let's start training your ability to get up and down off the ground. So if you land, you've calmed your body, you've taken a breath, you've checked for injury, you know you can get up and down because you've practiced, and then hopefully you can do it independently or with a little bit of help. All right. So I know that that's a lot in a short period today, but those are my top tips for preventing falls and for learning some of the basics of how to fall properly. I'm going to pass it over to Donna, who is going to help us with some questions. And here is our contact information again, if you need it. But over to you, Donna.
Let's get right to the question. So someone has asked, do falls happen without any warning, or does it usually start with almost falls or tripping?
From a Parkinson's perspective, usually people will start to feel off balance and start to have balance issues before a fall. But that being said, I mean, people without Parkinson's can trip anytime and have a fall, right? Falls happen out of nowhere often. But from a disease progression standpoint, people will often start to feel that instability coming on before they actually start to fall.
Okay. Someone is asking if it's inevitable that everyone with Parkinson's will fall as their condition progresses.
Not inevitable, no. I would say that there is, if you look at the percentages, the studies vary, but it is a large percentage of people with Parkinson's who do tend to have falls. You are at a higher risk of falls, but it's not inevitable. Not everybody with Parkinson's will have falls. We know that, we call Parkinson's a designer disease. Everyone has like a different buffet of symptoms that they get. So not everybody will have the same instability as somebody else. But again, I also always tell people it also depends on what you do as you are progressing through your Parkinson's, right? Challenging those capabilities early on is really going to help you to be at lower risk of a fall later on.
Okay, great. Can stress and the related increase in tremors that come with stress impact your risk of falling? And if so, why?
Um, so tremors don't inherently cause falls, but they can cause instability. If you are tremoring significantly, especially in the lower body, it can increase your risk of falls. And we know that stress increases Parkinsonian symptoms. So yes, there can be a correlation. Um, if you have an increase in tremor, it can throw you off balance a little bit, right? It can make it more difficult, for example, to, step up a curb and actually land your foot properly. And so that might lead to a trip or a fall, or it might cause you to not be able to lift that foot as smoothly as you go through your swing phase of your gait. So yes, they don't technically cause falls, but worsening tremors can throw you off balance. They can impact your postural stability.
Great. Okay, so this question is about risk reduction. So, what are the most effective in-home or in your outdoor space type of modifications that someone can make that can help reduce someone's risk of falling if they have Parkinson's?
So I would say there's a few categories. There's physical modifications that you can make to the space, and then there's modifications to yourself to help you be at lower risk of falls. I think we've talked a lot about the ones that you could do for yourself today, right? We know that all those exercise and training components are what are going to impact your risk of falls the most. But we also know that when it comes to Parkinson's, smaller, more compact spaces are harder to move around in. So usually we're looking at things like getting rid of furniture. So like opening up your space as much as you can. Carpets are things that people trip on often. We say cats, carpets, and couches. So I'm not going to make you get rid of your cat, but be aware that they can be a tripping hazard. Anything that in your space makes it kind of feel smaller and compressed tends to make people shuffle, step smaller, move smaller, and therefore be at higher risk of falls. People think that if they shuffle, if they're nervous about falling and they walk smaller, that they'll actually be at less risk. But that's why we talk about counting your steps and lengthening your steps out, because actually the bigger you move, the more amplitude you have in your movements, the lower your risk of falls is going to be.
Good to know. Someone is asking about medication that they're on to help raise low blood pressure. They're worried about the potential side effects of those drugs, like having to go to the bathroom more. And with that, having to get up um, urgently to go, does that not increase your risk of falls? And where do you find a balance between the need for the medication versus, the urgency of having to go and not being able to get there quick enough?
Yeah, that's a very good question. One thing that I will just throw in here is that I would first and foremost just make sure that it's actually the medication that is impacting the frequency. I get a lot of patients in who have frequency of urination and are up a lot at night to go pee, and they've had their prostate checked if they're male and their prostate's okay. And one of the things that is often forgotten is that you can actually get like a Parkinsonian bladder where your frequency is related to the kind of lack of proper muscle activation in your bladder, and that can actually be treated with things like Botox. So I actually have had patients who where that has been missed. So I think it's important to know what's actually causing the frequency in the first place, and making sure that that's clear. Once you're clear on what's causing it, there is a balance. Your falls risk is going to be higher if you're under medicated, right? Because you're going to be taking those small shuffly steps, and it's going to be difficult to move. Frequency, if you are moving smoothly because of the medication, then hopefully that frequency is still not putting you at a super high risk of falls because you're moving better because of the medication. But it is most definitely a balancing act when it comes to levodopa in general, right? We're always trying to kind of wiggle and find this balancing act between how much is too much medication and how much is too little medication. So every person is going to be individual, and obviously I can't give you medication specific advice, but I think you have to look at your individual situation and say, okay, well, if I am under medicated and I am off balance and stiff and slow because of that, then probably in that case it's going to be worth it for you, right? Even if there is an aspect of frequency in there. For others, maybe not. The only other thing I would say about that is that there are tools like urinals at the bedside, like commodes, right? Things that in the middle of the night can help. So you're not having to get up and go to a dark bathroom, having night lights on the floor, things that you can set up in your environment also to make that safer.
Great, thank you. I know that exercise is one of the main ways to help prevent myself from having a fall, but if I can't get outside to exercise as much during the winter, what are your recommended options?
So I would say that at home with a small exercise mat on the floor without any dumbbells or extra weight, you can do a lot. There's a lot of functional movement exercises that you can do at home, practicing your squatting, pushing up from the floor, getting up and down, right? Doing lunges and all those things. You can get a lot of intensity and aerobic work in there as well, just from doing things at home. I've got free videos on YouTube. There's lots of different options of, free videos where you can follow along and do those exercises. I know winter is tricky. If there's a gym nearby, obviously having the equipment at the gym is helpful. There are even like little pedals that you can get at home that aren't like a full bike, but just something to get a little bit of aerobic capacity at home. Ideally, we want you, even in the winter, to be able to get out of the house and go do things. But if that's not possible, there's so much that you can do in a tiny square at home when it comes to functional movement training. What's lovely about it is that you don't need machines for it. You don't even need weights for it. You can do so much of it just using your own body weight and challenging yourself in your space at home. So my advice would be, when it comes to exercise, something is always better than nothing. So find something that you can do at home in your space with little to no equipment, and that will always be better than not getting your activity in the winter.
Great. So a couple people have asked about safety in the shower. They're worried about losing their balance and their family's scared that they're going to fall in the shower. And I know you can use a seat or a bench in the shower. Do you have any other suggestions that can help someone stay upright in the shower?
So again, absolutely, there are physical tools that you can use in a shower, right? A shower bench, you can use grab bars in the shower. You can obviously, if you have the capacity, change your shower from a step over shower to a walk-in shower. But I also want you to think about what you're doing in the shower that's throwing you off balance. What people are often doing, what often throws people off balance is things like lifting their head up to shampoo their hair, to wash out their hair, right? Stepping in different directions, stepping to go pick something up in the shower. So think about those skills. If you are having trouble in the shower, is it the looking up that's getting you and you're getting dizzy and tending to tip backwards? Well, then that's something that you need to train or try and do differently. Maybe you turn around and you wash the soap out this way, right? If you are stepping to get your shampoo and that's difficult, then maybe you raise it to a higher point in your shower. You really need to actually pare down what is happening that's throwing you off balance, right? If static standing is hard, then maybe you practice standing with a wider base in your shower. Maybe you put little sticky dots on the bottom of your shower where your feet need to be to remind you to step wider. So I would want to know what is actually happening in the shower that's putting you off balance. It's a very reasonable place to be worried because it's slippery and people do tend to have falls in there. But I think those falls sometimes also happen for different reasons depending on the person. So look at your situation. Where are you getting off balance? Is it the stepping out of the shower that's hard? And then you need to practice those big stepping movements and how you can stabilize, right? Think about your individual situation and then practice what you're actually having trouble with.
I guess that's where that falls portfolio that you mentioned earlier would come in handy, where you're assessing the situation around the falls. We are going to make sure that everybody gets a sheet that they can fill out that has those questions on it. We
Wonderful.
had several people asking about if there's any specific footwear that can help prevent falls.
So I would say, again, my preference is for, and I put a bunch of, if you look on the slides, you'll see there's a whole bunch of little brands in there. I'm not associated with any brand, but what you're looking for in shoes is something that has what we call an anatomical toe box. So lots of shoes squish your feet together. So your feet will look like this, your toes together, sorry. So your toes will look like this inside of your shoe. You're looking for something that can give you space to spread your toes out and actually have contact with the floor. The other thing you're looking for is when you look at the bottom of your shoe, if it's quite built up, again, in the clinic to get people off balance, we stand them on foam mats. If your shoe looks like you're standing on a foam mat, it's probably putting you more off balance than it is helping you. So I can't say that the shoes will completely prevent a fall, but it does have a significant impact on your connection to the floor. Your feet are the only connection to the floor. So if you can't feel your feet on the floor, you're not going to feel as easily when you're tipping, right? Shoes that have a lifted toe can give you what we call like a rocker effect, right? Where it rocks your body instead of actually bending your foot. So I understand that some people do need those shoes for orthotic purposes and for things like that. But I would encourage people again to think about, can you look at a shoe that has an anatomical toe box so you can spread and move your toes and have contact with the floor to help reduce your risk of falls.
Great. Okay, well, we've got more questions, but we're just not going to have time for them all. We've already gone over time a bit. So if someone has asked questions and you haven't gotten your answers, please contact our support and information team, and they can help you out with some of the questions that you haven't gotten answered. Thanks to everyone for asking those really great questions. And on behalf of Parkinson Canada and everyone here today, I want to extend our deep appreciation to you, Naomi, for joining us and providing really great information on falls management. Everyone can watch their email inboxes for the follow-up email. It's going to include a link of a recording of this webinar and the resources and links that we mentioned here today. We also hope you'll join us for our next webinar, Wellness in Motion, taking place on Wednesday, December 10th from 2 to 3 Eastern. You'll meet 3 Parkinson Canada Care Fund recipients who are transforming care through innovative programs, highlighting how movement, mindfulness, and community can enhance your Parkinson's care. So watch your email inboxes for more details in the registration link. And lastly, when the webinar window closes, if you would take a moment to fill out our short survey that helps us plan programming, we'd really appreciate it. On behalf of all of us at Parkinson Canada, I'd like to thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. See you next month.